That title seems a little clickbaity, I'm sure, so I want to make sure that we clear that up so you know that it isn't. But first, I want to talk about Nana Shimura's quirk, Float. We don't know too much specifically about the quirk itself or the mechanics behind it. Does it allow her to hover in place? Does it allow her to outright fly? Can she control the direction of her floating? We don't know any of this, but at the very least, we've seen a panel of her in the air, sort of hovering where she is. Her and Gran Torino often jump between the rooftops of buildings, but if she can fly, why don't we see more of them up in the skies heading towards crime? Well, this could have just been because while Gran Torino does technically have the ability to fly with his boosters, doing so constantly for a long period of time, especially just for patrolling and traveling through the city, would be a waste of time and probably exhausting. Both of them would only have to use their quirk a little bit here and there to jump between buildings and skyscrapers in the city, but I guess it could also be that Nana's float was limited in some sort of way. We really don't know. It's exciting to know that Deku is going to be getting new quirks, especially when the two that we know he's trying to learn so far are so technical, because even if a quirk worked one way for the past user, Deku's version of the quirk is enhanced by One for All even further and pushed beyond its limits. So although Bakugo says that all of the quirks suck, Deku at least knows that all of these quirks are going to be limit-broken versions of the quirks. Even if Nana could barely float, or her quirk was just a free float in the air with a little bit of directional control, with One for All's boost fusing into the quirk, that should heighten the quirk so much that that kind of floating would just become outright omnidirectional flying. Now that we've talked about Nana's quirk for a bit, let's get started with the meat of the video. How exactly do I think truly awakening float will happen for Deku? Well, one thing we've learned about One for All since it started to give Deku new quirks is that the trigger for these new quirks to finally activate once they become available seems to be based around emotions or intentions. We've seen that anger and the will to capture something is what triggered Black Whip's release after it had activated when Deku was 1, mad about what Monoma has said about Bakugo and All Might, and 2, imagining capturing Monoma. When I was trying to think of the most Horikoshi way to continue forward with the new quirk, it made me think that for Float, instead of being based on anger and wanting to capture, the opposite would be true. So what's the opposite of anger and apprehending? How will Float activate? My theory is that Deku's Float is going to activate during the war arc when 2 conditions are met. 1, instead of wanting to capture something, I think he's going to want to have to save something. And 2, I think the emotion that he's going to have to experience for the quirk to activate instead of anger is love. We don't know much about Nana Shimura. When researching her for this video, one single theme seemed to stick out in a lot of her scenes: love. When All Might is first asking Gran Torino about Nana and if there was ever anything that she said about One for All that could help Deku with his dreams, Gran Torino remembered him and Nana jumping from building to building while she racked her brain about the truth of One for All. She realized that One for All has to record the will and memories of the individual users, and even said it was romantic to think that if they all fail along the way, they can meet again after death and continue to help each other. One wouldn't argue that she loved All Might and everyone that she left behind, but once again in the My Villain Academia arc, her love is displayed again. Even though Shigaraki's father had a hard life due to Nana's passing, and all of the steps that she took to make sure her family never came into contact with All for One, from the moments that we saw, it was obvious that Nana did love her child. She loved him so much that she separated him from her to keep him from the dangers that she faced. And I think that will to protect something, whether it's a person or just the idea of justice, along with just how passionate and full of love and life Nana was, are both things that would definitely be recorded into her quirk. Much like how Nana loved hard and wanted to protect everything, I think Deku's float quirk is going to activate in a moment where Deku is feeling love, while also wanting to save someone else from immediate danger. In these videos, I keep talking about how the past 15 chapters or so have all been set up for this war, and how everything is going to loop back around to what we saw in the preparation chapters. Keeping true to this, of course, one of the things we saw in those last 15 chapters were a few Deku and Ochako moments, with her even upgrading her costume in a way that mirrors Deku's with the new Deku bunny-style ears replacing her visor, and her new arm-based grappling hook that is definitely based off of Deku's Black Whip, and we have seen the two of them blushing and having more moments to make Ashido smile. Because of this and the title of the video, it's no secret that I think the feeling of love that's going to help Deku activate Float is his love for Ochako. If this is true, I personally think it would fit quite well with everything Horikoshi's been setting up, because Deku clearly has feelings for the #1 person in Class 1A who could help him with his new quirk. This is more than just an upgrade from best friend to girlfriend for Ochako and her character, and taking note of that was something that was really important to me when talking about this, because I know some people named Pineapple who would really prefer it if I stayed out of the shipping wars, especially if I'm not presenting some sort of mutually beneficial case for both of the characters. So I'm not just suggesting that Deku and Ochako's feelings for each other might take a more important role in the story just because I think it serves Deku's character and his ability to fly. To be honest, I think this would actually be a really interesting development for Ochako, who's had her struggles of dealing with her feelings in this situation. She's decided that focusing on Deku and her feelings instead of her ultimate goal of bettering the life of her parents isn't what she wants to do. But since then, a few things have changed. One, after the overhaul raid and Night Eye's subsequent death, she decided that what she really wants to do is help other heroes. It's odd to hear at first, because heroes are people who are there to help the population and keep them safe. But who does that for them? Ochako has a very who watches the Watchmen moment and realizes that while she does want to make money and become stable and rich enough to provide for her family and change their lives, that's not the only goal that she's allowed to walk towards. She realizes that she can focus on more than one goal and dedicates herself to becoming a hero that can help and save other heroes. We see this front and center during the joint training arc where Ochako saves Deku from his rampaging Quirk, and it's a perfect example of this new mindset from Ochako. She's always wanted to save people and her friends, but she's aiming to be the kind of hero that makes sure none of her allies dies, no matter what. Now that Ochako's learned that she can multitask and she's gained the goal of specifically helping heroes, it makes sense that she would be the one to help Deku with his float quirk. Maybe making him weightless will help him early on, but for all we know, she might have to even teach Deku how to orient his body while floating so that he doesn't accidentally rotate sideways or upside down. I'm sure you could totally imagine the two of them out in front of UA practicing float and zero gravity together, and who knows, the combination of the two might even make for some really interesting combination techniques, which is something we haven't really seen from Deku and Ochako together. Let me know in the comment section below what you think the odds are that IzuOcha is going to become the first canon ship in 1A, and what do you think about the thought of Deku having any sort of official relationship when he's in school or the series is ongoing. Much like how fighting together brought Naruto and Hinata closer during the war in Naruto, could we see this new quirk and the circumstances they're in finally push Deku and Ochako into more of an official relationship? After all, there are other UA students that are confirmed to be dating in other classes, so it's not like Horikoshi is completely against including canon couples amongst all of the students. All this talk of high school heroes and dating makes me think of another character that Horikoshi is a massive fan of, and that's Peter Parker, or Spider-Man. In Spider-Man stories, we get plotlines where he has to deal with young love, responsibility, school, family, and the troubles of being a hero. One might say getting into relationships in My Hero Academia might be a distraction, and making one pairing over the other's canon might trigger the fanbase to a certain extent, but on the positive end, I think the way that Horikoshi could play with the tension of the story by using Deku and Ochako's relationship, much like Peter and Mary Jane's is often used, would be very interesting, especially since Ochako is in a very different situation since she's a hero herself, and here she'd even be taking on more of a teacher role to Deku, something which isn't very common in Spider-Man since Mary Jane doesn't often get the chance to help Peter learn new powers. Now, putting aside the potential of there being some sort of relationship between Deku and Ochako forming in the nearby future, let's keep in mind that the two need to keep their attention to saving the public during this raid, because Deku and Ochako are both on the evacuation team. I don't think this is a coincidence, and like I said earlier in the video, I think Deku's float quirk will somehow activate during this raid, and Deku's gonna have to learn how to use it quickly enough to put up a fight against whichever enemy he's up against, or even to get the victims or himself out to safety. It could even specifically happen in a moment where Ochako herself is in danger, and Deku, much like Nana Shimura, embodies the feelings of love and wanting to protect Ochako, letting him fly in and save her last second. For those that aren't here to talk about how the bonds of love and happiness can help Deku grow, let's talk about how the bonds of love and tragedy can help Shigaraki do the same. You might have forgotten already, but this video is actually more than just about how Deku is going to unlock float. I actually believe that Shigaraki is going to be getting the quirk as well, so let's talk about that. To explain, first I have to start somewhere that seems kind of random. Shigaraki gets the hands of his family members from Dr. Uchiko when All For One first brings him home. Shigaraki then later on kills a pair of thugs, and All For One gives Shigaraki their hands, but little Shigaraki points out that there's now 5 hands, which is odd since there should only be 4. All For One says that this one is just a little bonus to make up for one of the hands that Shigaraki destroyed earlier. But we know better. There's something darker at play here. If you're a fan of this channel, you know that I think All For One is entirely responsible for all the terrible things in Shigaraki's life. But the terrible things that I think he did to young Tomura really just keep on adding up. Think about it. All for One killed Nana Shimura, and we personally don't know what happened to her body. The doctor is All for One's right-hand man, and we know that he's able to move bodies around and get his hands on the remains of heroes, so All for One could have gotten Nana's body and given it to the doctor after taking her quirk from it. Many fans have pointed out that All for One hovers ominously after blowing away the warehouse that Best Jeanist is in during My Hero Academia Season 3. And with that scene in mind, his ability to fly definitely seems to come from him removing Nana's original quirk from her body after her death. Even in her death, Nana still had the body of an amazing hero. So knowing the doctor and All for One, I'd bet that her body was actually used to create one of the high-end Nomu that we haven't seen in action yet, and she might even be the female high-end that we've seen in Ujico's lab. But with that said, her body potentially still being around for a long time after her death means that it's possible for the doctor or All for One to still have her hands, or at least one, to give it to Shigaraki. We know that they aren't against giving him the hands of his dead relatives, but this would be even more dark and twisted because Shigaraki wouldn't even know that this would be his grandmother's hand. Now you could argue that Shigaraki wouldn't care about this at all, but I think that Nana holds a really complicated place in Shigaraki's psyche. As a kid, he idolizes heroes. He would play heroes of all the other kids in the neighborhood who had no one else to play with, and they would all gather around him, saying that he's sort of like All Might. Despite that, his household completely rejected the idea that he could ever be a hero, that he could ever do anything heroic or anything that would stand out. His father had to have prayed that his son was quirkless because that would cement his will over Tomura never becoming a hero. But I guess unluckily for him, that wasn't the case. Every circumstance in Shigaraki's life pushed him to become what he became. But there was one force that pulled him away. Hana, Shigaraki's sister, showed him the photo of Nana Shimura because she was a hero. And if she could be a hero and she was their grandmother, then that meant that little Tenko had the blood of a hero in him no matter what his dad said. Even though he's let go of all of that, the image of Nana's picture was what sparked his liberation in the My Villain Academia arc in the first place. As the various hands get destroyed by Redestro's assault, Shigaraki feels himself feeling liberated of all of his troubles and even joins in shedding them himself. He rids himself of everything unnecessary, including the hands, and by destroying everything and surrounding himself in only destruction, Shigaraki was showing us what made him the happiest. Destroying and getting rid of everything that he hates and surrounding himself in the things that he loves. He even does this with people, because it's clear that Shigaraki loves his comrades like Twice and Toga. Well, if Shigaraki has gotten rid of all of the unnecessary parts of who he was, and all that remains are things that are going to build towards who he is and who he will be by the end of these 4 months, then why did a hand survive? This hand surviving Shigaraki's mayhem and even still being carried around and protected by Shigaraki places some sort of narrative importance on it moving forward. And if it is Nana Shimura's hand, what could that importance be? Well, like the title of this video suggests, I think the hand is how Shigaraki is gonna awaken Nana Shimura's float quirk. Thanks to details in the Doctor that we have on the manga and the Heroes Rising R special volume and more, it's recently been confirmed that the Doctor has been taking advantage of quirk duplicating technology. We've gotten hints of this throughout the series, with the most notable one being Hood the High-End Nomu apparently having Muscular's quirk. Now, being able to replicate quirks definitely goes in hand with the Doctor's Nomu creation, and we've seen the guy just has a library of quirks that he can choose from to apply to various Nomu and maybe even himself. Really, I'd imagine that every hero that Gigantomachia kidnapped for All for One has a copy of their quirk stored away by Uchiko. But we could even take it a step further and theorize that the Doctor might have the quirks of the previous users of One for All. At the very least, we know that it's possible for the Doctor to have had access to Nana's body and for him to have time to clone her float quirk. But even if he hasn't, I'd bet that he'd still be able to copy her quirk data from her hand and process it into a quirk that he can then use for his Nomu and even Shigaraki himself. Much like I theorized about Shigaraki getting a copy of All for One during this 4-month process, what's the likelihood that Dr. Uchiko would also be able to duplicate Nana's quirk from the hand that they have and give that to Shigaraki as well? After all, what's the point of having a copy of All for One without a loadout of quirks to take with you as you head into battle? I'd really love this, because in a way, this would be like Shigaraki finally accepting the last part of his past that was holding on to him and weighing him down in the form of this hand that I think signifies the last part of Shigaraki's heart holding on to that dream of wanting to be a hero long ago. Nana's hand holding the significance and even just the memory of how Nana's photo inspired a young Shigaraki is sort of like Nana holding onto her grandson from the grave, reminding him of who he could have been, and that it isn't too late to go back even after all of this. There's no way for Shigaraki to know that this hand is Nana's hand, but I think Horikoshi is definitely the type of writer that would make the love and bond that Nana shares of her family be something that shines through just enough to give Shigaraki the feeling to want to hold onto this hand. We see Shigaraki getting ready for his 4-month surgery, bare and stripped of everything, ready to be crafted into his new form. But even here, he stares at the hand and thinks. It's like he sees it and it makes him think of something. And I think even though he doesn't have any idea why the hand makes him think of those things, it's a really beautiful thing for Horikoshi to do, while also being a pretty common writing technique revolving around family bonds being felt even through items or gifts that are passed on. I think finally letting go of Nana's hand and accepting whatever it is that Shigaraki's holding on to will both narratively and literally allow Shigaraki to become so weightless and free as a result that he can even really fly. I'll talk more about Shigaraki and his ties to Nana in my War Arc Part 3 video about All Might's death, because this plays into it big time, so make sure you check that out when it drops, but I'm probably going to slip this into the War Arc playlist since this is definitely shaping up to be like a War Arc 3.5 video. With that said, all of this floating honestly sets up a crazy final battle with Deku and Shigaraki. I was writing this video initially to talk about how float could be Deku's perfect counter against Shigaraki, because of course Shigaraki can't really hit Deku with his Floor's Lava quirk if Deku can fly. Since it wouldn't make sense for Deku and Shigaraki's final battle to only involve one person who can fight or fly in midair, it makes sense that Shigaraki will somehow awaken the ability to fight in the sky, or at least he might get some wicked anti-air abilities that could ground Deku. Of course, knowing Horikoshi, Deku even awakening ability that lets him completely counter Shigaraki's decay quirk is probably a clue itself that something like this might happen. What do you guys think, and did you make it through all of my piecing together and rambling? Hope you liked the theory, and I love you guys so much. Enjoy your Valentine's Day, remember that you're special, and this is Pineapple. Peace.